Hey folks, welcome to BrickVault. My name is David and today we have something really special and cool to look at. Part of it is an update to an already existing pair of Starfighters on BrickVault, but now they also have their hyperdrive wings to go with them. I'm gonna be honest, these are some of the single coolest creations I own and an absolute marvel of LEGO engineering by the builder Caleb Briggs, which is also one of the coolest and most fitting names for a LEGO builder. Caleb Briggs also designed our U-Wing and the single greatest MTT to ever exist, and he's an absolute pro at what he does. Definitely check out his Instagram for some of his other builds, you won't be disappointed, I promise. His latest creations are called as follows: Obi-Wan Kenobi's Delta-7 Aethersprite class Light Interceptor and Anakin Skywalker's Delta-7B Aethersprite class Light Interceptor, both with Sullior 31 long-range hyperdrive module, or short, Jedi Starfighters and booster rings. Both the Delta-7 and the Delta-7B were short-range starfighters and didn't consist of a hyperdrive themselves, except for the Azure Angel, Anakin's custom Delta-7, which he modified to be able to go into hyperspace without having to utilize a hyperdrive ring. Admittedly, a hyperdrive ring looks much cooler though. The main difference between the Delta-7 and the Delta-7B is the relocation of the astromech droid to the middle of the ship and the therefore wider center hall to accommodate a full droid instead of the before used head part of the droid in the wing. But we're going to take a closer look at the differences and the super smart connection to the wings a little later in the video. First off, and that's really important for these builds, you will definitely want to build these for yourself, as the Starfighters on their own are super high end and still super affordable at around $40 for Anakin's and $50 for Obi-Wan's Starfighter. Don't worry, we got you. Just head on over to our web store www.brickvault.toys, where you can find the instructions and parts list for these and many more custom LEGO models. You can download the parts list for free before making the purchase, so you can check your own LEGO collection or the prices for the parts on Bricklink before buying the instructions. If you're new to the hobby, we have a video guide on our homepage that guides you through the easy steps to build your dream creation. With your purchase, you not only support the amazing builders we work with, like Caleb, but also us here at BrickVault, so we can continue bringing you the best custom creations for you to be able to build as well. That's www.brickvault.toys, or click the first link below in the description, and back to the video. Now, LEGO made a ton of Starfighter sets for Anakin and Obi-Wan, and one of them even comes with a hyperdrive ring, which was a cool addition, and I also happen to own the 2008 Anakin Starfighter and the most recent Obi-Wan Starfighter set to compare them to. None of them even come close to what Caleb has been able to achieve in LEGO form here though, since accuracy at all cost was not what the sets aimed for. But I still think a side-by-side is extremely interesting to see, especially with such a wide range of release dates to compare to. The booster wings on their stands with the Starfighters take up quite some vertical space, 40 cm to be exact. Here are the dimensions. You can check out the specific numbers on the product pages on brickvault.toys. Now for a proper size reference, I have a ukulele here that I am definitely able to play if you were to ask me, but please don't. Let's first focus on the Starfighters. We have quite some details to cover on such small vehicles actually. The Obi-Wan Starfighter is actually the second generation that Caleb built. I built the first iteration a few years ago, actually a number of times, and that model already was so impressive to me that I was certain that it's not possible to make a better Jedi Starfighter out of LEGO. Now a couple years later, and I take back what I said. Admittedly, the Starfighter makes use of some parts that weren't available back when he designed the first version, for example here in the front or the tiny roof pieces in the middle section, but it definitely doesn't depend on them too much, which just shows you how the designer's skills improved even more over time. I count only 17 studs showing on the outside, without counting the astromech stud. That's really impressive because it means that a lot of the snot technique was used, which in turn means that you have to really pay attention when figuring out the techniques to still have the Starfighter be as slim as it should be, because obviously plate connections are much slimmer and easier to make sturdy than bricks laying on their sides. That coupled with panel pieces overlapping these sideway bricks, by the way one of my favorite techniques, leads to the perfect color blocking. The general shape of the Starfighter has been captured perfectly. Of course we have R4's head sticking out on the wing and the Republic insignia on the other side, and the slopes leading up to the cockpit is so ingenious. The cockpit can open up and fit Obi-Wan inside. He has a cozy leather seat, perhaps bantha leather, who knows. Also, there is even working landing gear included that can be folded down, and an absolutely unnecessarily cool detail is the tiny simulated hydraulic lift arm on the front landing gear that folds away when folded up. I love this build for details like this. That's what it's all about as a designer. Also, while we're at it, the underside is detailed as well and really built up. You can see how the engines taper in towards the front, and I like the use of these real pieces for the thrusters because they have nice turbine details in them. As for stability, this is actually really sturdy. Caleb made sure to attach most sub-assemblies with more than one stud or snap them into place at more than one place, which really improves the handleability of this build. It's so swooshable, I found myself coming home to the model, removing it from the wing and just flying it around my apartment. It's so super enjoyable, especially having built the model myself and knowing of all the cool techniques in it and how everything comes together so tightly. The only sections I found to be a little bit loosely connected are in the back. They're not problematic at all, but they move a little when being grabbed, something that's easily avoidable if you're using all new parts, which I didn't. Nothing falls off though, and I'm trying to be as rough while being as reasonable as you would in a day-to-day scenario as possible. But let's move on to Anakin's Delta-7B variant. As you can see, this looks a lot different from Obi-Wan's fighter, and not only because of the different color scheme. This version has never been seen in any live action movie, but only in the Clone Wars. That, combined with the fact that it's based on a whole other vehicle, makes up the differences. Like I said, and as you can see compared to some screenshots, the main hull is completely different and much bulkier, which has been captured perfectly in Lego form here. And of course we also have the astromech slot in the middle of the ship instead of in the wing. We're still not able to fit a full astromech inside, but I personally think that's not really necessary here anyways. If you blur your eyes a bit, this ship looks spot on. It looks straight out of the cartoon, and if it didn't have the few studs on the top side, it would look like a regular plastic toy from Hasbro or so. It's so cool to see a custom version that accurately depicts the shape of the ship instead of it looking like the regular Delta-7, which is what I saw a lot of other mock builders do. Caleb studied this model, and you can tell. Besides the obvious color differences and the shaping of the main body, there aren't many differences. It is based on the exact same skeleton, so it is equally sturdy and playable, and the build is easily as enjoyable with a ton of cool and interesting techniques that I learned from while building. I'm tempted to say this time they are perfect and can't be made any better. Change my mind. Okay, now let's come to what you have been waiting for in this review, which are the hyperdrive wings. Let's start with Obi-Wan's wing. As you can see, it's sitting in some sort of frame that's necessary to have it display upright, because I'm almost certain that it can't hold its own weight when placed on a surface without a stand. The wing is really bendable, it holds its shape perfectly, but it can bend if you put pressure on it, so having a stand that displays it like this without it being under pressure of its own weight is not only genius but also necessary in this instance. The stand makes the model lean to one side a little bit more, which makes it a tad bit more dynamic. The wing can be removed easily if you wanted to play around with it, which is also technically totally possible if you grab it by the engines, but sliding it back into its stand can be a bit tricky if you're doing it on your own. It's best if you have something to push it against so the stand can't move. I just leave mine in there anyways. The build for this was also really enjoyable. I was really impressed how sturdy it is and how dense the build is. There are so many different techniques that make up the round shapes. Usually designers go for one technique, but here you can find so many. A great inspiration for builders who want to build rounded shapes as well. There are a couple of sections that I want to point out that I found particularly interesting to build and look at. The first thing is the shape in the middle. First off, it's all snot. Second off, it was incredibly satisfying how everything came together here. And lastly, there is one tiny white stripe here. Nobody would have noticed if it wasn't here or if it just was a regular facing tile, but Caleb built up this whole section in this way only to make this line so thin. The other section I found very cool is the way the white stripes have been depicted in the engines. It's panel pieces in there connected in a very clever way to make up a really thin white line. Generally the shapes here are so cool to look at. They would be cool if it was a flat surface, but this area being round is even more cool, and the look of the vents on the sides is really cool too. Now, what you all have been waiting for, how do you connect the Starfighter in the wing? Actually, you don't. It just sits in there, held in purely by friction. There are a few rubber pieces in there that you can see if you look on the underside. They are the perfect space apart for the Starfighter to fit perfectly. Caleb even left a small groove for the tile in the middle of the Starfighter, and the fighter fits perfectly deep into the wing, right before the head of the astromech would be impacted. It's all so well thought out, it's crazy. You can see it's really easy to insert the fighter. The first time doing it feels a little sketchy, but once you've done it a couple of times, it's super easy and really sturdy once inserted, and taking it out is even more simple. I never expected anything like this when we first talked about the hyperdrive wing and Starfighter being the next MOCS Caleb tackles. I had really high expectations, but Caleb exceeded those expectations easily. I was under the impression that a Starfighter had to have some sort of Technic protrusion or anything like it that would stick out from the look somewhere on the build to properly connect to the wing. That would have been an understandable compromise, but that's not what Caleb thought. I'm super happy with how this looks, and I'm so looking forward to seeing the first people putting this next to our Jango Fett Slave 1. I think that would be an unbeatable display, something I'm looking forward to once I receive the rest of the BrickVault models from the US. Let's quickly take a look at Anakin's wing as well, which is similar to Anakin's Starfighter, based on the same skeleton, but changes up some techniques to get the proper color blocking on the engines. As you can see, we don't have the thin white lines on the sides, but it's a grey line that's wrapping around the engine. It's generally a little simpler than Obi-Wan's, you can see that on the wing itself. It doesn't have so many crazy details and colors, but is a little more subtle with its appearance. The same can be said for the middle section. Everything's yellow except for the part that holds Anakin's Starfighter. Speaking of, it is shaped quite differently on the underside to hold the slightly different shape of Anakin's Starfighter. There is a round tile on top of Anakin's Starfighter which had to be taken into consideration, and the rubber pieces are positioned a little different. It too looks extremely badass when put together. I'm so extremely euphoric talking about these two. I'm just so happy with these builds and how sturdy they are. I'm probably gonna take one home from the studio again to play around with during my free time, and you should as well. I can just recommend these builds full-heartedly, even if it's just the Starfighter without the wing. They will be available separately on BrickVault.toys. Speaking of, another shameless plug, you can get the instructions and parts list exclusively on BrickVault.toys or via the link in the video description. Let Caleb and myself know if you enjoy these builds and this video by giving it a like, and comment which one is your favorite and which Jedi deserves their own Starfighter in our web store, and we'll catch you next time at BrickVault.